Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. I just watched Black Widow. Let's talk about it. So she's finally here. Finally. And when I say finally, I don't just mean all of the delays and all of the rescheduling that had to take place as a result of the pandemic. No. I'm talking about how this film is like 10 years overdue. I'm talking about how this film should have happened ages ago in phase 2 of the MCU instead of kicking off phase 4, because the fact of the matter is this character has been a key component of the MCU for so long. There is no reason why she had to wait so long in order to get her own solo film. But we're finally here. We're finally here to discuss Black Widow, the movie that is directed by Kate Shortland, notably directed by a female director, the first solo female director to take on an MCU film, because of course in the case of Captain Marvel it was co-directed by a female director alongside a male one. So this is the first time that we have gotten a solely female directed MCU movie, and of course that makes sense because we are focused on the character of Black Widow, the only female member of the Avengers from the first Avengers movie. But with all of that build up, with all of that anticipation, with the stakes being as high as they are, did this film meet any of it? Well, I'm here to discuss my thoughts. I'm here to discuss my thoughts on this film, of course, but as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And be sure to write down in the comments below what you thought of Black Widow after waiting so long to see this character get her own solo flick. Do you think it was worth the wait, or did you have some issues? Did you have some qualms with how this story was told? Let me know down in the comments. But without further ado, let's dive into the thoughts that are buzzing in my brain. Now, as I already mentioned, when it comes to the character of Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow, the stakes were incredibly high in order to give her a great solo outing that she deserves after all these years of being a key player in the MCU. But on top of that struggle, on top of that difficulty that was already there, we have the fact that the character actually ended up dying in Avengers Infinity War, and so we already know the ultimate outcome for this character, and essentially this entry would be a sort of prequel to the events that took place in Avengers Infinity War, and we all know that prequels can be really tough to do because the audience already knows the outcome. So how do you set up the stakes for the events that take place in it? Well, the answer to that question in this film is to have the Black Widow be surrounded by, first of all, other Black Widows because of course this is the Black Widow program, so of course we got to see other Black Widows in action, which was exciting. We'll talk about that in a second. But also a key feature of this film is the introduction into Natasha's previous family. Now, these aren't her biological family members, but they're her adopted family from the circumstances that she comes from, the fact that she was brought into this spy life from a very young age, and she was part of this operation that these other spies were a part of, where they were trying to take data, take intel in order to develop this certain technology, which meant that in the early parts of her life, namely in the early 1990s, she was living out this fake suburban lifestyle in Ohio whilst her fake parents were stealing tech and stealing information from these labs nearby. So it's a really interesting setup because once again you have the backstory of Natasha finally be told, and we finally get some wider context into her character, but at the same time it also makes you invested in other people because we ultimately know what Natasha's end is going to be. And even though we like the character of Natasha, it's good to get another character that we can be invested in because we won't know the outcome of them. So in terms of the characters that we're introduced to in this film, first of all we have Rachel Weisz's Melina. She plays Natasha's mother when they're much younger, and she is a scientist, a very intelligent scientist who was also part of the Black Widow program. So she went through the same programming from the Red Room that Natasha and Yelena went through as well, which means she's just as vulnerable to their tactics as the other two are, but she's in a different position now now, because she's so knowledgeable about science and she's doing all of the sciencing, okay? She's doing all the sciencing on pigs, right? So she actually has a little bit more flexibility in that she doesn't have to stay in the actual institution. She has her own little farmhouse situation with the pigs, testing out the cognitive abilities and how they're affected by this dose of chemicals that are able to, you know, change the biochemistry of people's brains and get them under the control of Dreykov, which is essentially the outcome that the Red Room wants. Now, I really enjoyed Rachel Weisz's entry into the MCU. I thought she was a great mother figure for Yelena and Natasha. She seems to have a closer relationship with Natasha in the way that David Harbour's Alexei has a closer relationship with Yelena, which is an interesting dynamic that they explore here. But yeah, I really did enjoy her performance here. The character that she portrays is somewhat antisocial. You can tell that she hasn't been around a lot of people for a very, very long time. She's this kind of archetypical scientist. So she's very particular about her surroundings, and also she looks at things from a very clinical perspective, as was the case with the pig, who she forced to stop breathing, and everyone was like, whoa, like, let the pig go. And she was like, what? Like, he can withstand another 11 seconds, it's fine. So she looked at it from a very clinical perspective in that way. But you see how the family that she was pretending to have in the 90s actually started to kind of break down some of those walls, especially as a result of the Red Room training. And she actually became fond of the people that she was sharing a life with, even though it was all a facade and it was all an act in order to complete this mission. The relationships that were shared there during that time and the experiences that they had together actually meant something to her. And I feel like it's a reflection of the way that these relationships also meant something to Natasha, because again, they seem to have more similarities as characters within this family dynamic. And on the opposite side of things, as I mentioned, you have the interactions and the relationship between Yelena and Alexei, who both seem to wear their emotions more on their sleeve. In the case of Alexei, he is this boastful, proud Russian super soldier. He is the first and last Soviet super soldier. And first of all, can I just say, just to interject here when it comes to the super soldier serum situation, I'm over it, okay? I'm over it. Listen, the specialness of the super soldiers are kind of being worn off at this point in time, especially after Falcon and the Winter Soldier as well. Like, how are there so many super soldiers around? Like, I was already excited about the black super soldier that we got in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I was like, okay, great, that's fab. But now we have a Soviet one. We also had a whole like host of super soldiers in Captain America Civil War. And then of course you had Carly and the gang in Falcon and the Winter Soldier take the super soldier serum as well, although they all ended up dying to create a false scarcity, I guess. But yeah, it's tough when you see all these super soldiers around. It kind of lacks the specialness that they should have at this point in time, and we've seen so many of them. But still, David Harbour's Alexei is a very special character, aside from the fact that he has the super soldier serum coursing through his veins, because of his boastfulness, because of his larger than life personality, and he's also somewhat of a doofus. He's a lovable doofus character basically, but he's an incredibly strong, skilled man, and unfortunately he was betrayed by his man Dreykov, who didn't give him the recognition that he thinks he deserved for his antics as the Red Guardian, who's supposed to be the kind of Soviet parallel to Captain America. And of course it makes sense then that throughout the entirety of this film you see Alexei holding a grudge against Captain America, okay, because his fame and his notoriety was stolen from him as a result of Dreykov's actions, and so he has this like grudge and the fact that his, you know, adoptive daughter happened to work in the same team as Captain America makes him inquire about Captain America all the time. Like, he was already obsessed. He was already obsessed with Captain America beforehand. He was like I was supposed to be on the same level as him. Like, we are equals. But then Natasha comes along and she's an Avenger. She works alongside Captain America. So he's trying to get all the juicy details. He's trying to get her to spill the tea. Okay, he's like, listen, spill the tea on Captain America. What's he really like? I bet you he's not as good as he seems, right? Like, he's not that great, right? Of course, Natasha and Yelena point out just how self-absorbed that he he is, especially considering he hasn't seen them in like 20 years, and the first thing that he does is like talks about himself and of course the rivalry between him and Captain America that is very much one-sided. And finally, in the family, we have my favorite family member, my favorite introduction into the MCU that we get from this film, and that is Yelena, who is portrayed by Florence Pugh. I think Florence did an excellent job. I think Florence stole a lot of scenes in this movie. I very much enjoyed Florence Pugh's portrayal of this character. Yes, she does have these kind of zingy one-liners. She is part of the comedic relief that we get in this film that is otherwise quite serious. It isn't a jokey Guardians of the Galaxy fare. It's very much a serious, you know, Captain America the Winter Soldier-esque entry into the MCU. But we do have the two comedic reliefs here in the case of course, David Harbour's Alexei, but less so, but still impactful in the case of Yelena as well, who has these, again, one-liners that are pretty cool. And even though I didn't really laugh out loud at many of these like comedic moments, it still added up to create a really fun, charismatic, enjoyable character to watch, who also has layers to her. And she, more than any of the other members of this dysfunctional family, was affected by the facade that she experienced early in life. The fact that the whole experience of being a family in Ohio, in the suburbs, was just fake. Like, it wasn't real the entire time. Her parents weren't her actual parents, and her sister wasn't her actual sister. The fact that this ended up being fake to her has a bigger impact because she was much younger. She was the youngest in the family, and as a result, you know, those relationships that she formed at that point in time in her life really meant something to her. She didn't understand that it was all a facade. And so I really appreciated the fact that this film leans into the fact that she is the baby sister. It's not afraid to depict this character as the baby sister who is emotional when Natasha says that none of it meant anything to her. And she does kind of recoil at the fact that, you know, they're dismissing the relationships that were formed between them as a family when she was so young. She gets upset by that, and I like the fact that the film leans into that instead of just portraying these badass female characters that are, you know, very two-dimensional, because the only way to portray a powerful female character is to basically have her be an archetypical male character. No, we've progressed past the need for that kind of trope, okay? And I love the fact that the film recognizes that, and I think that has a lot to do with, again, the fact that we do have a female director, but also that we've moved so far beyond all of these archetypical tropes when it comes to female characters in general, that we're able to see different layers to these characters where they are allowed to be emotional, to acknowledge their emotions, to acknowledge their periods, actually, to acknowledge their menstrual cycle or lack thereof as a result of the Red Room's antics, horrible torture devices, okay? And whilst at the same time we get to see them kick ass when they need to. We get to see them do the job when they need to. Now, speaking of doing the job here is getting the vials of antidote, the antidote to the brainwashing chemicals that were developed by Melina. They're trying to get them to the Red Room, to all of the Black Widows there, so that they can free them from the control of Dreykov. And basically the vials of antidote act as some really great bright red MacGuffins for this film. And you know, there are times when these characters are like tumbling from buildings, like whole buildings. These characters are just dropping, you know, tumbling across these buildings, okay, on their way down to the ground, and these vials never break. Like, they seem to be made out of this like vibranium container because they never break, no matter how many times these characters are in like exploding buildings, they fall down buildings, they fall across bridges, doesn't matter, these vials will never break. But you know, fine, they're MacGuffins, so they're just there to kind of move the plot forward. And of course you also have the question of why they exist in the first place. Why would Dreykov allow the creation of the antidote to the major weapon that he's been developing that would potentially make him the most powerful man in the world? Like, why would you just be like, okay, I have this great plan, this solid plan to use these Black Widows, take control of their minds completely and have them seep into various governments around the world, creating havoc, creating creating madness, pretty much like Hydra. But you know what, just in case I change my mind one day, just in case I decide to go down a different route, maybe I'll make an antidote. Yeah, maybe I'll have Melina whip up an antidote just in case, you know, I decide to go down a different way. Like, why would you chance that? Now, in the case of the plot itself, I don't think it's an accident that we have a lot of themes of female exploitation to begin with. I mean, you can substitute the Black Widows for, you know, various different things that we see in the real world, especially pertaining to the exploitation of women. And of course, you have the highlighting of the fact that their uteruses were removed, their reproductive organs were removed because they were seen as defects from the misogynist that is Dreykov. And so, yeah, you do have those kind of, you know, feminist themes throughout this film. And essentially what Natasha is doing when she takes down the Red Room, even though we don't really see much of it, but whatever, what she's done here is basically taken down the patriarchy, literally, because Dreykov sees himself as the father of all of these Black Widows, who has managed to rid them of their defects in order to make them the perfect weapons that he can use in order to control as much of the world that he can. Overall, when it comes to the plot itself, when it comes to the MacGuffins, when it comes to, you know, what is bringing Natasha on this mission to begin with, I would say it's a pretty substandard MCU plot. Not even just an MCU plot, but like a Mission Impossible plot. And in fact, this film very much gave me Mission Impossible Fallout vibes, which is interesting. But yeah, it's the kind of plot that we've seen time and time again, with this very clear, again, bright red MacGuffin having a huge play here. And we do have some twists and turns along the way. Like, for example, we do have the Taskmaster. The Taskmaster is a very interesting character, okay? I had initially thought, based off of the trailers and the fact that he was on the cast list, that the Taskmaster would have been portrayed by the actor from The Handmaid's Tale. I'll put his name over here. But I thought it would actually be him underneath all of that, but it turns out that it's Dreykov's daughter. Now, Dreykov's daughter has been name dropped previously. I believe it was by Loki in like the Avengers film, or maybe someone else name dropped her. But you know, it's this whole history behind Dreykov's daughter and how Natasha initially helped S.H.I.E.L.D. bring down the Red Room, but unfortunately she went down along with Dreykov, or so she thought. And so yeah, it turns out that Dreykov's daughter is the Taskmaster, and she's also being mind controlled by her father, just going to show how deep his misogyny, his hatred of women runs, to the point that he would do that to his daughter. Sickening, disgusting, evil man. But in terms of Dreykov himself and how he stands with the rest of the MCU villains that we've gotten so far, I wouldn't say that he's going to stand out as like one of the most memorable MCU villains at all. Like, no, I'm sorry. Like, I think he's kind of in the lower tier in terms of MCU villainy. And, you know, it kind of matches up to the overall storyline as well. And interestingly enough, this film is the start of phase 4 of the MCU. Like, it's supposed to kick off an entirely new phase, and of course, because of the pandemic, we've waited a little bit longer for this phase to officially start anyways, because it's been like a 2-year break from Avengers Endgame, or actually no, it's Spider-Man Far From Home. That was the final film in phase 3, so we've had to wait a while for phase 4 to kick off in the film side of things, not counting the Disney Plus series that we now have. And it doesn't really feel like this film is kicking off a new phase in the MCU, and that is partially, of course, because we have a Black Widow movie that's only coming round after she died spectacularly in Avengers Endgame, but also because the whole film itself very much gives, you know, Captain America the Winter Soldier, which was an excellent entry into the MCU, but it has been like 7 years, believe it or not. It's been 7 years since that film came out, and when the MCU has just grown and just developed and changed so much since then, that going back to that kind of formula and that kind of backdrop feels a little bit repetitive and kind of done at this point. Having said that though, I will say that there are a lot of positives about this film that really make it an enjoyable experience anyway. First of all, of course, we have Scarlett Johansson giving us her final portrayal of Black Widow, aka Natasha Romanoff, and she's just spectacular as this character. I want to give her all the flowers right now because, you know, apparently this will be her last hurrah in the MCU, and I just think that she has come such a long way as a character throughout the MCU, particularly in the case of her entry in Iron Man 2 being just so different to how the character ended up being by the end of her tenure here. And yes, there were so many missed opportunities to delve into this character with more depth and with more consideration. There were all these weird detours, like her romance with the Hulk, which no one needed or asked for. No one needed or asked for. Thanks a lot, Joss Whedon, whatever. That's the least of his problems. But anyway, there were a lot of detours, but ultimately I feel like there were a lot of highlight moments as well. I personally feel like her best portrayal up until this point was in Captain America the Winter Soldier, and I discussed this actually in my Loki review, but I love the interaction that she had with Steve and the genuine friendship that was there. But yeah, I do feel like there were great moments for this character, and even more so came from this film that overall made it a very enjoyable experience, not least because of the incredible bombastic action sequences. Okay, the action sequences were tough, the action sequences were hard. Okay, I love the fact that once again we have these female filmmakers, female directors, writers. Jack Schaefer is a writer on this film, and she of course was a creator and writer on WandaVision. But I love the fact that these female filmmakers have portrayed this female iconic character in the MCU in such a badass way. When she's fighting, she means business. Like like obviously Yelena makes fun of her because she also has some flourish. Speaking of WandaVision, she also has some flourish in her movements. Okay, she has some superhero poses, but she means business when she's fighting still. I feel like now more than ever in these action sequences, when we see Black Widow, like the hit feels like it lands. It feels like every single hit that she throws lands. Okay, it makes an impact. Okay, it very much felt like her movements were just so swift and efficient and ruthless, and at the same time she was also being attacked in a swift, ruthless way as well, especially by the other Black Widows. And so I really liked that, because we often don't see, you know, female characters getting attacked like that. It's usually male characters that are allowed to be beaten up on screen, and female characters end up with just like one little scratch one little lip bleed, one little scratch, whereas in this film, like, Natasha gets beaten up. Like, Natasha gets beaten up, she does some beating up of her own, and it all just feels a little bit more impactful and a little bit more exciting to me. Although I will say there is the scene near the end of the film where Natasha does get beaten up by those Black Widows, who all just kind of gather around in a circle and take turns just kind of kicking her or punching her, and that very much reminded me of The Boys season 2 with the girls get it done scene. But yes, overall Black Widow is finally here. We did have to wait a while for this character to have her own installment in the MCU, but I do feel like it was worth the wait. I love the interactions between Natasha and Yelena. I loved seeing Natasha in her own element, speaking her native tongue as well, and just seeing her kind of connect with her past and the Red Room. A lot of that was kind of hidden from us throughout the other MCU films, and getting to understand the character a little bit more and her want for a familial connection, which she found in the Avengers and was able to kind of rediscover with the family that she had in her early childhood. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Black Widow a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Black Widow, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.